point at yourself. Go ahead, do it right now. Lift your hand and point at the thing you call you. Where did you point? Your chest? Your head? Somewhere behind your eyes, maybe. That little spot where it feels like you're sitting, watching the world through two holes in a skull. Now here's the problem. There is nothing at the place you're pointing. Not you, anyway. There are neurons, about 86 billion of them connected by trillions of synapses, firing electrical and chemical signals in patterns so complex that no human and no computer has ever fully mapped them. There's blood, there's water, there's fat. Your brain is about 60% fat, which is not the most flattering fact about human cognition. But the thing you call you, the experiencer, the narrator, the one who decided to click on this video, the one who just lifted a hand and pointed, that thing doesn't exist. It has never existed. Not in your brain, not anywhere. And the fact that you feel so absolutely, unshakably certain that it does, that's the most sophisticated illusion evolution has ever produced. A philosopher named Thomas Metzinger spent 20 years building the case for this. It's laid out in a book called Being No One, published in 2003. And I'm going to be honest with you, it's one of the most difficult books I've ever tried to read. Dense, technical, written in the style of analytic philosophy, which means sentences that are 5 lines long and contain words like phenomenal transparency and auto-epistemic closure. Metzinger is a German philosopher of mind at the University of Mainz, and he writes like one. But underneath the academic armor, the argument is devastating. And I'm warning you now, by the end of this video, you will not be able to unthink what I'm about to tell you. Let me start with what most people believe, because I think if we're going to demolish something, we should at least be honest about what we're demolishing. Most people, and I include myself in this, or at least the version of me that existed before I read Metzinger, carry around what philosophers call the naive model of selfhood. It goes something like this. There is a you inside your body. This you is the one having experiences. It receives information from the senses, sights, sounds, smells, processes that information, makes decisions, and directs the body to act. It's like a little pilot sitting in the cockpit of a flesh machine, watching the instrument panels, pulling the levers. The philosopher Daniel Dennett calls this the Cartesian theater. The idea, going back to Descartes, that there's a central place in the brain where it all comes together, where the show is performed for an audience of one. The self, the inner observer, the ghost in the machine. It feels completely real. It feels so real that questioning it seems absurd. Like questioning whether you're awake right now. Of course you exist. You're right here, reading these words, thinking about them. Who else would be doing that? But here's the thing. If there's an inner observer watching the show, who's watching the inner observer? You'd need another observer to observe the first one, and another one to observe that one. It's an infinite regress. Turtles all the way down. The Cartesian theater doesn't solve the problem of consciousness. It just pushes it back one step and pretends it's gone. And if you actually go looking for the pilot, if you crack open a skull and peer inside, or if you map every neural circuit with the most advanced imaging technology on the planet, you won't find anyone sitting there. No control room, no central executive, no little person watching a screen. You'll find a vast, distributed, parallel network of neurons doing their own local thing. And somehow, this is the mystery. Somehow, this activity adds up to the sensation of being someone. But there is no someone it adds up to. There's just the adding up. Now, I know that sounds like philosophical hand-waving, abstract stuff, the kind of thing that sounds clever at a dinner party but doesn't really mean anything when you stub your toe. So let me give you evidence. Concrete, experimental, you can do this in a lab evidence that the self can be hacked, fooled, relocated, expanded, dissolved, and reconstructed in minutes. Let's start with the rubber hand illusion. This is a classic experiment, first published in 1998 by Matthew Botvinnik and Jonathan Cohen. The setup is almost comically simple. You sit at a table, your real left hand is hidden behind a screen, a rubber hand, obviously fake, visibly artificial, is placed in front of you where your real hand would normally be. Then a researcher simultaneously strokes your hidden real hand and the visible rubber hand with a paintbrush, in exactly the same pattern, at exactly the same time. Within about 90 seconds, that's it, 90 seconds, your brain starts to believe the rubber hand is your hand. Not metaphorically, not sort of. Your brain genuinely incorporates the rubber hand into your body schema. If someone suddenly stabs the rubber hand with a needle, you flinch. Your skin conductance spikes, the same stress response you'd have if your real hand were threatened. Your brain has decided, based on correlated sensory input, that this chunk of rubber belongs to you. Let that land. Your sense of body ownership, the feeling that this arm is mine, this hand is mine, is not based on some deep metaphysical truth. It's based on statistical correlation of sensory inputs. Line up the signals, and your brain will adopt a rubber hand. A table. Henrik Ehrsson at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm extended this to the whole body. In his experiments, subjects wearing VR headsets could be made to experience their self as being located inside a mannequin across the room. They felt touches on the mannequin. They flinched when the mannequin was threatened. Their self, the thing they'd point to if you asked, "Where are you?" had moved. Not their body, their self. And then there are phantom limbs. People who've lost an arm or a leg frequently report vivid, persistent sensations from the missing limb. Not just vague feelings, specific, detailed experiences. An itch on the phantom thumb, pain in phantom fingers, the sense that the missing hand is clenched in a fist that can't be opened. V.S. Ramachandran, a neuroscientist I've mentioned in previous videos, showed that you can relieve phantom limb pain using nothing but a mirror. You place a mirror so the patient sees a reflection of their intact hand where the missing hand would be. Then you ask them to move both hands simultaneously. The brain sees the reflected hand moving and interprets it as the phantom hand moving. The clench releases, the pain stops. Think about what this means. The brain was generating a complete, convincing experience of a hand, with spatial location, with texture, with pain, for a hand that doesn't exist. And it could be relieved by showing the brain a visual lie. The self model isn't tracking reality. It's constructing a simulation that's useful for the organism. And it maintains that simulation even when the body part it's modeling is gone. Because the model was never about truth, it was about function. But here's where it gets even stranger. And this is a piece of evidence that I think is genuinely one of the most disturbing findings in all of neuroscience. Split brain patients. In the mid-20th century, a treatment for severe epilepsy involved cutting the corpus callosum, the thick bundle of nerve fibers connecting the left and right hemispheres of the brain. The procedure worked for seizures, but it created something that should have blown up our entire concept of the self, and somehow It mostly got filed under interesting neurological curiosity. Here's what happened. When the corpus callosum is cut, the two hemispheres can no longer communicate directly. The left hemisphere controls the right hand and handles language. The right hemisphere controls the left hand and processes spatial information, but typically can't speak. Researchers, most famously Roger Sperry and Michael Gazzaniga, discovered that you could show information to only one hemisphere by flashing it in only one visual field. And when they did this, the two hemispheres behaved like two separate agents. In one classic experiment, the word walk was flashed to the right hemisphere. The patient stood up and began walking. When asked why he was walking, and remember, the question goes to the left hemisphere, which didn't see the word, the patient didn't say, "I don't know." He confabulated. He invented a reason. "I'm going to get a Coke," or "I wanted to stretch my legs." The left hemisphere, which is the narrator, the explainer, the storyteller, it made up a reason and believed it. It had no idea that the right hemisphere had received an instruction. It just saw the body doing something and immediately constructed a narrative of intentional action. I did that. I chose that. Here's why. This is not a rare finding from a single patient. It's been replicated dozens of times with different split-brain patients. And the implication is staggering. The part of your brain that generates the feeling of being a unified agent, the narrator, the I that takes credit for decisions, is not the part that actually initiates the action. It's a post hoc storyteller. It watches what the body does and constructs a narrative of intentional, unified selfhood after the fact. Your sense of being one person, making deliberate choices, is a story your left hemisphere tells itself about events it didn't cause and doesn't control. When I read Gazzaniga's accounts of these experiments, I had to put the book down. Because the split-brain patient isn't doing something pathological. He's doing something everyone does, all the time. Confabulating, narrating, claiming authorship over actions that were initiated by processes outside conscious awareness. The only difference is that in a split-brain patient, you can prove it. In the rest of us, the hemispheres are connected, so the confabulation is seamless and undetectable. But it's still confabulation. And this is where Metzinger enters and takes the whole thing to a level that I was, frankly, not prepared for. Metzinger's central concept, the one that I think is genuinely one of the most important ideas in the philosophy of mind, is what he calls the phenomenal self-model, or PSM. And I'm going to do my best to explain it because this is the payload of the entire video. Your brain, Metzinger argues, is constantly running a model, a simulation. It's modeling the external world. That's what perception is. You don't perceive reality directly. Your brain constructs a model of reality based on noisy, incomplete sensory data. And that model is what you experience. Anil Seth, a neuroscientist at the University of Sussex, calls this a controlled hallucination. Your perceptual experience is a hallucination that happens to be constrained by incoming sensory data. When the incoming data stops constraining the hallucination, as in dreaming or psychedelic states, the model goes haywire, and you experience things that have no external correlate at all. Okay, so far so good. Most neuroscientists would agree with that much. But here's Metzinger's move. He says, your brain doesn't just model the external world, it also models you. It generates a self-model, a representation of the organism within its own world model. And that self-model is the thing you experience as you. The feeling of being someone, the sense of having a perspective, the conviction that there is a subject at the center of your experience. All of that is generated by a computational process in the brain. It's a model. A useful, sophisticated, evolutionarily refined model, but a model. And, this is the critical part, you can't see it as a model. Metzinger calls this the transparency of the self model. A transparent model is one that the system using it cannot recognize as a model. You look through it, not at it. When you look at the world, you don't see your perceptual model. You see the world. When you introspect, you don't see your self-model. You see yourself. The model is invisible precisely because seeing through it is what it's for. If you could see the self-model as a model, it would stop working. It would be like a VR headset that constantly shows you the pixels. The illusion would break, and the evolutionary advantage would be lost. Pay close attention here, because this is the part that kept me up at night. Metzinger is not saying yourself is just a model, and once you understand that, you can see through it. He's saying the exact opposite. He's saying the architecture of the model is such that you cannot see through it. The transparency constraint is built into the system. You are inside the simulation, and the simulation is designed so that you can never see its edges. You can intellectually accept that the self is a model. You can read Metzinger, nod along, agree with every argument. And then you'll walk away and feel exactly like a self, because the feeling is not generated by your beliefs. It's generated by a subpersonal, automatic, computational process that your conscious reasoning has no access to. The prison is made of glass you can't see. Now, you might stop me here and say, okay, fine, the self is a model, a simulation, a useful fiction generated by neural processes. But so what? Isn't that just how brains work? We model everything. We model physics, we model other people's intentions, we model the future. Why is the self-model any different? Why is it an illusion rather than just a representation? Fair question, and Metzinger has an answer that I find both elegant and disturbing. The difference, he says, is that every other model your brain runs, you can, at least in principle, recognize as a model. You can understand that your perception of color is a construction, not an objective property of the world. You can understand that your prediction about what someone will say next is a guess, not a fact. You can step back from your models and evaluate them, but you cannot step back from the self-model. Because the thing that would step back is the self-model. There is no independent you that can examine the model of you from the outside, because the model is all there is. Metzinger's phrasing, and this is the sentence that I think should be carved into the wall of every philosophy department on the planet, is, no one has ever been or had a self. Not the self is just a construction. Not the self is more complicated than we thought. No one has ever been or had a self. There is no entity possessing the model. The model is running, and the running of the model is the total reality of what you experience as selfhood. There is no one home. There never was. I'll give you a few seconds to let that sink in. Now, why would evolution do this? Why would natural selection build organisms that generate a persistent, unshakable illusion of selfhood? Because it works. Organisms that model themselves outcompete organisms that don't. If you have a representation of your body, where it is in space, what state it's in, what it needs, what threatens it, you can plan. You can predict. You can avoid danger and seek resources more effectively than an organism that merely reacts to stimuli. The self-model gives the organism a virtual center, a point of reference from which to navigate the world. And the transparency of the model, the fact that you can't see it as a model, makes it faster and more efficient. If you had to constantly deliberate about whether your hand is really your hand, or whether you really exist, you'd be eaten by a predator before you finished the thought. So the self is a tool, a survival tool, like a claw or a wing or an immune system. It was never designed to be accurate. It was designed to be useful. And usefulness and accuracy are not the same thing. In fact, they often diverge. Evolution doesn't care if your model of reality is true. It cares if your model of reality keeps you alive long enough to reproduce. And a model that includes a persistent, confident, unquestionable sense of being a unified self, navigating a concrete world, that model works spectacularly well for survival, even if it's spectacularly wrong about what's actually happening. Here's a thought experiment that might crystallize this. Imagine two organisms. Organism A has a rich self-model. It experiences itself as a unified agent, feels ownership over its body, has a continuous sense of identity across time, and believes with absolute conviction that it exists. Organism B has no self-model. It processes the same sensory information, but it has no sense of being anyone. No I, no subjective center. Which one is more likely to fight desperately to survive a predator attack? Which one plans for the future? Which one forms social alliances based on a sense of self-interest? A survives, B doesn't. And A passes on the neural architecture that generates the illusion. Run this for a few 100 million years and you get us. Organisms so thoroughly convinced of their own existence that questioning it feels like madness. And there's another dimension to this that I think is underappreciated. The self-model doesn't just give you a spatial center, a sense of being located in a body. It gives you a temporal center, a sense of continuity across time. The feeling that the you who went to sleep last night is the same you who woke up this morning. The conviction that your memories happened to you, to this same person, this same self. But consider what actually happens every night. You lose consciousness. The self-model shuts down. For hours, you don't exist. At least, not in any meaningful experiential sense. And then the machinery spins up again in the morning, loads your memories, reconstructs your personality, rebuilds your body schema, and generates the seamless feeling that you've been you all along. That there's been a continuous thread of identity running through the gap. But there wasn't. There was a gap. The thread was respun from scratch. Or consider this. Every atom in your body is replaced roughly every 7 to 10 years. Your neurons are largely the same, but the molecules that compose them are constantly recycled. The thing you are made of is not the same stuff it was a decade ago. Your memories, those anchors of personal identity, are not recordings. They're reconstructions. Every time you remember something, you rebuild it from fragmentary traces, filling in gaps with plausible fabrication. And the self that remembers is itself a fresh construction, rebuilt moment to moment by neural processes that don't remember doing the rebuilding. So what's continuous? Not the matter, not the memories, not the consciousness. What's continuous is the model, the process that keeps generating the illusion of continuity. And we've confused the output of the process for an actual, persisting entity. It's like watching a fountain and believing the shape of the water is a solid object. The shape persists. the water doesn't. There is no fountain. There's just water being thrown upward continuously. But here's where it gets really interesting, and where Metzinger's work intersects with something ancient, something that was articulated 2,500 years before neuroscience existed: Buddhism. The Buddhist concept of anatta, no self, holds that the sense of a permanent, unified self is the fundamental delusion that causes human suffering. The self is not an entity, but a process, an ever-changing stream of mental events that we mistakenly reify into a thing. Liberation, in the Buddhist framework, comes from seeing through this illusion directly, not intellectually, but experientially, through meditation. Metzinger is fully aware of this parallel and writes about it explicitly. And the tension is fascinating, because Metzinger is a Western materialist. He's not making a spiritual argument, he's making a computational one. The self is a data structure, a model running on neural hardware, and it happens to produce an illusion of selfhood as a byproduct of its processing. He arrives at essentially the same conclusion as the Buddha, but through neuroscience, not contemplation. And yet, and this is what I find deeply provocative, the Buddhist tradition claims you can see through the illusion. Experienced meditators report states in which the sense of self dissolves, while awareness remains. Not unconsciousness, not sleep. Clear, vivid, awake experience, but without anyone experiencing it. No observer, no center, just open awareness without a subject. Metzinger takes this seriously. He's actually done research on meditation and altered states. But he's also cautious. He acknowledges that meditation can disrupt the transparency of the self model, can make the model briefly opaque, visible as a model rather than being mistaken for the modeler. But he doesn't claim this is a permanent escape. The transparency constraint is deep. The neural machinery that generates the illusion is always running. You might get glimpses behind the curtain, but the curtain repairs itself. And this is the conceptual turn I want to make. Because up to this point, you might have been thinking, okay, this is interesting philosophy. The self is an illusion. I get it. But I can understand that intellectually and still go about my day, right? Nothing changes in practice. And Metzinger's response to that is, exactly. That's exactly the point. And that's what makes it so much worse than you think. Because the transparency constraint means that knowing the self is an illusion does not free you from the illusion. You are not Neo taking the red pill and waking up from the Matrix. There is no waking up. The machinery that generates the feeling of selfhood operates below the level of conscious access. You can read every book on the neuroscience of consciousness, agree with every argument, understand the philosophy completely, and you will still feel like a self. You will still feel like there's someone behind your eyes. You will still feel ownership over your body, authorship of your actions, continuity with your past, and anxiety about your future. Because those feelings are not beliefs. They're outputs of a process you cannot reach. You know it's an illusion. You feel it's real. And you will feel it's real for the rest of your life. That's the prison. Not that the self is an illusion, but that knowing it's an illusion changes nothing. Now let me take this somewhere practical, because philosophy that doesn't touch the real world is just decoration. If the self is an illusion, if there is genuinely no one home, no inner agent making decisions, no unified I that deserves credit or blame, then what happens to moral responsibility? This is not a rhetorical question. This is a real problem that legal scholars, ethicists, and neuroscientists are grappling with right now. Our entire system of criminal justice is built on the concept of a responsible self. You committed the crime. You made the choice. You are guilty. You deserve punishment. But if you is a process, if decisions emerge from neural computations that no inner agent controls, then what exactly are we punishing? And who? Think about this concretely. Imagine a defendant in a murder trial. The prosecution argues that this person chose to kill, and therefore deserves punishment. The defense might argue diminished responsibility due to mental illness or brain damage. But Metzinger's argument goes further than any insanity defense. He's not saying some people lack a self due to pathology. He's saying no one has ever had a self. The prosecutor doesn't have one. The judge doesn't have one. The concept of choice, as we use it in law, a free agent weighing options and selecting one, describes something that has never happened in the history of the universe. I want to be clear, Metzinger is not saying we should abolish the legal system. He's not saying nothing matters or do whatever you want. He's making a more subtle and I think more troubling point, that the conceptual foundations on which we built our moral and legal systems are factually wrong, and we don't know what to replace them with. We've been building on sand, and the tide is coming in, and no one has a blueprint for a new foundation. Sounds like nihilism? It's not, and Metzinger is adamant about this. The fact that the self is an illusion doesn't mean suffering isn't real. Suffering is generated by the same neural machinery that generates the illusion of self. Pain doesn't need a someone to hurt. It hurts as a process, and the process is real even if the experiencer isn't. In fact, Metzinger argues that understanding the self model should increase compassion, not decrease it. If no one chose to be the person they are, if personality is the output of a model that no one authored, then blame becomes less coherent, and empathy becomes more appropriate. But I won't pretend that's a satisfying answer, because it isn't. It's the beginning of a conversation that our species needs to have and hasn't had yet. Let me tell you about dreaming, because I think it's the most accessible doorway into Metzinger's ideas, the place where you can almost feel what he's talking about. When you dream, your brain is running a full world model and a full self model. You see places, you talk to people, you have a body, you make decisions, or at least it feels like you make decisions. You experience emotions, sometimes extreme ones. The dream world feels real while you're in it. You don't usually know you're dreaming. The model is transparent, but the constraints are off. Sensory input from the external world is largely blocked. The reality check mechanisms that normally keep your world model calibrated are offline, and so the model runs free. You fly. Dead people talk to you. Buildings have rooms that shouldn't exist. The narrative makes no sense, but in the dream, it makes perfect sense, because the part of your brain that would notice the nonsense is asleep. Now, in a lucid dream, something different happens. You become aware, within the dream, that you are dreaming. The model suddenly becomes opaque. You can see it as a model. You realize that the world around you is generated, that the body you're inhabiting is simulated, that the people you're talking to are constructions of your own neural activity. And the experience is extraordinary, vivid, electric, unsettling. You're inside the simulation, and you know it. Metzinger argues that this is the closest most people will ever come to seeing the self model for what it is. In a lucid dream, you briefly experience the transparency constraint being violated. You see the code. And then you wake up, and the waking world feels solid and real and unquestionable. But it's the same kind of model, just better constrained better calibrated, more useful, but not more real in the way you think real means. Psychedelic experiences, particularly with psilocybin and DMT, seem to do something similar. They disrupt the self model, sometimes partially, sometimes catastrophically. The dissolution of the ego that psychonauts report is, in Metzinger's framework, the self model becoming temporarily opaque or fragmentary. The boundaries of the self become fuzzy. The sense of being a separate observer watching a separate world breaks down. And people report that what's behind the self, when the model thins or drops away, is not emptiness. It's not nothing. It's awareness without an experiencer. Experience without a self. Which is again exactly what Buddhist meditators have been describing for 2.5 millennia. And which is, in Metzinger's framework, exactly what you'd expect. If you disrupt the neural process that generates the self-model, the process of consciousness continues, but the virtual center point disappears. The movie keeps playing, but the audience is gone. I want to end with something that isn't an answer, because I don't have one. Metzinger doesn't have one either, not really, and he's honest about it. There's a passage in The Ego Tunnel, Metzinger's more accessible book, the one I'd actually recommend starting with, where he talks about what he calls the existential challenge. And it's this. If we take the self-model theory seriously, if we accept that the self is a useful fiction generated by neural computation, then we face a genuinely new situation in human history. For the first time, a species has developed the tools to understand that the thing it holds most precious, its sense of selfhood, is an artifact, a construction, a trick of the light. Previous cultures dealt with this through religion, through metaphysics, through stories about souls and afterlives and cosmic purposes. Those stories served a function. They stabilized the self-model by giving it a narrative. You are a child of God. You have an eternal soul. Your suffering has meaning. These claims are almost certainly false, but they were functional. They kept the organism running. What do we replace them with? Metzinger doesn't say, and I think that's honest, because we are, right now, in the earliest stages of a cultural reckoning with the fact that selfhood is a neural construction. The science is there, the philosophy is there. What isn't there is a way of living that fully absorbs this knowledge without collapsing into nihilism on one side or denial on the other. So tonight, when you lie down and close your eyes, and the voice in your head starts narrating your day, reviewing what happened, planning what comes next, worrying about something it can't control, ask yourself, who is listening? Not what is listening, not which brain region, who? And if you look for the listener, if you really look, if you turn the spotlight inward and try to find the one who's hearing the voice, you won't find anyone. You'll find the looking. You'll find the searching. You'll find the feeling of being someone who's searching. But you won't find the someone. And notice carefully, that the question still feels like it belongs to someone, that the searching still feels like something